Before we go any further, if this kind of deep, serious wartime history is why you're here, make sure you subscribe to the channel and leave a comment as you watch. This channel exists for people who don't just want surface-level stories, but hard-earned lessons pulled straight from history. What we're covering today isn't about battlefield heroics. It's about how ordinary civilians survived occupation in cities where the enemy controlled the streets, the food, and the information. These are lessons learned under extreme pressure, and they still matter. World War II urban survival rarely looked like trench warfare. In occupied cities across Europe and Asia, survival depended on adaptation, discretion, and psychological discipline. Civilians were not fighting tanks head-on. They were fighting hunger, surveillance, informants, and sudden violence. The most successful survivors understood one thing very clearly: visibility was dangerous. Blending in was often more powerful than resisting openly, and survival was built through thousands of small deliberate choices made every day. Why urban occupation demanded a completely different survival mindset. Unlike rural resistance, urban occupation placed people under constant observation. Curfews, ration cards, checkpoints, and informant networks turned cities into controlled environments. Survival required learning how to appear compliant while quietly protecting one's autonomy. People who lived longest understood how occupiers thought, how patrols moved, and how regulations were enforced unevenly. They watched patterns obsessively. Which streets were patrolled at which hours, which officials could be bribed and which could not. Knowledge became a survival resource just as important as food. Practically, this meant civilians memorized their neighborhoods like maps in their heads. They knew alternate stairwells, unlocked basements, and which buildings had interconnected attics. In Warsaw and Paris, people escaped raids not by running, but by disappearing into structures designed long before modern policing. Applying this knowledge today means understanding your environment deeply, not casually. Urban survival starts with knowing how spaces connect, where movement funnels and where anonymity is strongest. When official systems broke down, it was actually the underground economies that kept people alive. Ration systems during the Second World War, you see, were really designed to control populations, not to sustain them. In occupied cities, black markets weren't some kind of criminal luxury. They were genuine lifelines for survival. Civilians would trade their skills, repair goods, and barter services long before any money changed hands. For example, a tailor might trade repairs for a loaf of bread, while a mechanic might fix a bicycle in exchange for a bit of firewood. What truly mattered in those times was usefulness. The people who managed to survive the longest were those who made themselves valuable in ways that, well, didn't attract too much attention. They picked up trades that could be practiced quietly. Things like sewing, cobbling, repairing radios, or sharpening tools. Rather than hoarding obvious goods that could be confiscated during a search, they focused on what they could do. The real lesson here isn't about romanticizing hardship, it's all about practicality. In restricted systems, adaptable skills will always outperform stored resources. Even today, if you're thinking about survival, it's wise to emphasize what you can do, not just what you happen to own. Interestingly, one of the most effective urban survival tactics was simply appearing boring. Occupation authorities, tended to focus on anything that seemed out of the ordinary. People who frequently changed their routines, traveled without a clear reason, or acted nervously ended up drawing unwanted attention. The real survivors developed quite rigid daily patterns. They'd leave at the same time, take the same routes, and return predictably. This sort of consistency, in the end, made them blend right into the background noise. In practice, resistance members often use this principle even while conducting illegal activity. A courier might always carry groceries, so their movement appeared domestic. Messages were hidden in mundane objects like shoe soles or bread loaves because inspectors expected contraband to look suspicious. The takeaway is simple. Survival often depends on not standing out. Whether avoiding modern surveillance or historical patrols, predictability can be protective when used intelligently. How information control and silence saved more lives than weapons. Occupied cities were information battlefields. Rumors killed people. Loose talk led to arrests. Successful survivors practiced disciplined silence. Families agreed never to discuss sensitive matters indoors, assuming walls had ears. Children were taught not to repeat anything at school. Resistance cells compartmentalized information so no one knew more than necessary. This wasn't paranoia, it was mathematics. Torture and coercion worked when people knew too much. Today, this translates into operational discipline. Sensitive information should be shared on a need-to-know basis, even among trusted groups. WWII teaches that trust is not enough. Structure protects people when pressure is applied. Civilians, they turned infrastructure into survival tools. Urban infrastructure, originally built for peace, suddenly became vital survival assets during occupation. Sewers, tram lines, abandoned tunnels, and factory corridors. These allowed people to move unseen. In cities like Berlin and Leningrad, folks repurposed bomb shelters, transforming them into food storage, clinics, and even schools. Water access points were memorized since, utilities could fail without warning. Applying this sort of mindset, it means looking at cities not as static layouts, but rather as layered systems. Think about what exists below street level, which buildings actually connect internally, where the power, water, and waste systems run. Survival, in these circumstances, isn't really about brute force. It's about using what already exists, but more intelligently than those who are trying to control it. How psychological resilience became really a survival skill. Perhaps the most underestimated tactic was emotional control. The occupation aimed to break morale through humiliation, fear, and unpredictability. Survivors learned to regulate their reactions. Public anger invited punishment. Visible despair attracted exploitation. So, people cultivated emotional neutrality in public spaces, saving grief and rage for private moments. This wasn't weakness, it was discipline. Maintaining psychological balance allowed, much clearer thinking during crises. Even today, this lesson applies directly. Panic degrades decision-making. History shows that calm, even under sustained pressure, is honestly one of the most powerful survival tools available. World War II urban survival was not about dramatic resistance moments. It was about endurance. It was about learning when to act, when to disappear, and when to wait. These civilians survived not because they were braver than everyone else, but because they were more observant, more adaptable, and more disciplined. If this kind of deep historical survival analysis matters to you, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, share this video with others who care about serious wartime history, and leave a comment with what aspect you want explored next. This channel is built for people who want to learn from history, not just hear stories.